I was born to be my brother's lifeline. When I said no to the transplant, they turned on me. But one camera changed everything. I'm 24 years old and have always believed my family was rather regular. They weren't very affectionate, but they were also not cruel. They always made sure we had all we needed, celebrated birthdays, and went through the "we're a good family" routine when other people were present. Nothing screamed dysfunction. My oldest brother, Arthur, is 28. If you had asked me a year ago, I would have responded that we were treated fairly. Not exactly the same, but nothing unusual. But now I see my parents had me believe a lie. Growing up, I noticed a few things that seemed wrong. Nothing major, just minor moments that made me wonder whether I was imagining things. When Arthur and I got into a fight, they always had me apologize first, even if we were both wrong or he initiated it. If I tried to explain my point, they'd say I was being difficult, emotional, or overly sensitive. When Arthur got into trouble at school, my parents supported him, claiming that the teachers were harsh or that he was simply stressed out. When I got in trouble, I was lectured on how I should make better decisions. When Arthur forgot something, my parents dropped everything to help. When I forgot something, they would sigh and tell me that I needed to take responsibility. It was like that my entire life. Little things I overlooked because, well, what else was I meant to do? When you are raised in a certain way, you do not question it. You believe that's just the way life is. Arthur enjoyed sports, and my parents were infatuated with his games. Every Saturday, they were there, shouting and yelling at the referees, completely invested. I was in choir, and they never came to any of our performances. When I asked why, they always gave an excuse. However, they were never too exhausted to attend Arthur's football games. I stopped asking after a while. It didn't seem worth it. Arthur never regarded me as a genuine person, only an irritation. If I drew any notice, he'd roll his eyes or make a snarky remark. When I won a local choral competition, he grumbled, "Too bad nobody cares about choir." If I received a higher mark than him, he'd smash my pencils or mutter that I was lucky. He despised me for being, as if I was occupying space that should have been his. And what about my parents? They never stopped him. They simply allowed it to happen as if it were normal. Even in interactions with relatives and friends, they enjoyed talking about Arthur. He was extremely clever, intelligent, and had a promising future. When they mentioned me, it was never about me. It was about how I supported Arthur, how I was a wonderful sister, and how I was always there for him. In their eyes, I was nothing more than his shadow. I persuaded myself it did not matter. I told myself it wasn't so horrible, that some families just have preferences, and that didn't mean they didn't love me. I assumed I was simply being overly sensitive. I wish I had trusted myself more. Everything changed 1 year ago. Arthur was diagnosed with kidney illness. My parents were upset, and I was shocked. He tried several therapies and medications, but his condition worsened. Eventually, the physicians informed them that he required a transplant, and as soon as they heard the word transplant, they focused on me. I recall sitting in the hospital room when the doctor addressed it. My mother instantly turned to me and said, "Wouldn't it be amazing if you were a match?" She was already beaming and acting as if this was occurring, as if I was about to save the day, like I always did. My father nodded as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Arthur scarcely glanced up from his phone. I recall feeling weird about it. I wasn't opposed to helping, of course. I didn't want my brother to die. But something about how swiftly they determined this was my responsibility made my stomach flip. It was not even a conversation. They did not ask if I was comfortable with it. They didn't inquire how I was feeling. It was expected. I went along with the tests since I did not want to start a conflict. And to be honest, I prayed I wasn't a match. I persuaded myself that if I wasn't, I'd at least avoid the consequences. However, that is not how life works. I was a match. And the instant the results arrived, it was as if I had already committed to the procedure. My mother sobbed tears of delight. My father patted my back and said, "We knew you wouldn't let us down." Arthur said nothing at first. He merely nodded and said, "Yeah, that's what's supposed to happen." I felt sick. I attempted to bring it up lightly, saying that this was a huge decision and that I needed time to think about it. I wasn't sure yet. My mother quickly shut it down. "Elysia, this is your brother. You don't think twice about family. It wasn't a question, it was a command. My father scoffed, shaking his head as if I had spoken the silliest thing possible. What do you mean you're not sure? What kind of person hesitates when their own blood needs them? That's when I began to realize how imprisoned I was. I began conducting my own study, looking into what kidney donation actually entailed. I knew it was serious surgery, but I had no idea how much risk was involved, especially for me. I had some underlying health conditions, which complicated the procedure. My doctor stated that my recuperation would be different from that of most other donors. I wouldn't just recover in a few weeks. I could be out for months, and my body would never be the same. I'd be more susceptible to kidney disease myself. My chance of long-term problems was increased. And God forbid, if my remaining kidney failed in the future, I'd be screwed. Then there was the money aspect. I have college loans and a job that does not provide paid medical leave. If I did this, I wouldn't just lose one kidney. I would lose my income, stability, and ability to care for myself. I could wind up drowning in debt since my parents expected me to do everything without question. And as I thought about it all, I realized something even worse. My parents and Arthur had never asked me how I felt about this. They didn't inquire if I was terrified or okay. They didn't sit me down and say, "Alicia, this is your choice, and we will support you no matter what." Because it wasn't a choice for them, it was a responsibility. I was not their daughter. I was the solution. I kept thinking I was mistaken, that if I sat them down and explained everything, they'd understand, realize what they were asking wasn't fair, and see me for the first time. So that is what I did. I sat down with them, took a deep breath, and said, "I don't think I can do this." The moment those words left my mouth, the entire room became silent. My mother's expression froze, as if her brain refused to accept what I had spoken. My father looked at me, puzzled, as if I had suddenly started speaking a different language. And Arthur? He simply exhaled deeply, shook his head and said, "Of course." Typical. I'm not sure why I assumed they'd truly listen. I'm not sure why I expected my feelings to matter to them for once. "What do you mean you don't think you can do this?" My mother's tone was stern, as if she were challenging me rather than asking, as if I had just made an outlandish claim. I responded, "I mean, I've been talking to my doctor and it's not a simple surgery for me. There are a lot of risks, and my recovery could take months. I'd have to take time off work and My father cut me off with a scoff. "So what? People donate kidneys all the time. They're fine." I tried to keep my voice steady. "Not everyone, and not me. My doctor said my situation is different. It's not just a few weeks of recovery, it's been months. And financially, Oh, don't even start with that," my mother screamed, rising up so quickly that her chair scraped against the floor. "This is about your brother's life, Alicia. How can you even think about money right now?" "Because it's my life too," I wanted to scream. "Because I'm the one who will have to deal with the repercussions. Because I wasn't even given a chance to make my own decision before you all made yours." But I didn't mention any of that. I could already sense the shift. Their expressions tightened as they understood I wasn't simply hesitating. I was considering saying no. And just like that, I was no longer their daughter. I was the problem. Arthur rolled his eyes. Unbelievable. I turned to face him. "Arthur, this isn't personal, You're making it personal," he shot back, standing up himself. "You're choosing to let me die." "That's not what I'm doing. I need time to think." "What is there to think about?" my father asked, his voice frigid. "This is your brother, Alicia. He'd do it for you." I actually laughed. A brief and sour laugh. Because that was the biggest falsehood I've ever heard. "Would he?" I asked, gazing straight at Arthur. "Would you, Arthur? If the situation was reversed, would you give me your kidney?" His gaze shifted to our parents for a half-second before he whispered, "That's not the point." Right. Of course it was not. My mother was now attempting to suppress her actual rage. "I can't believe you're doing this," she said softly, her voice breaking. "After everything we've done for you." That's when the guilt trip began. My father began counting everything they had ever spent on me, including my school fees, clothes, and childhood health appointments. My mother burst into tears, repeatedly saying, How could you do this to us? As if I had committed some awful act. They called me ungrateful, selfish, and a disappointment. Then Arthur delivered the final blow. You know what, Elysia? His tone was cold. I always knew you'd be useless when it actually mattered. That hurt. Not because I expected more of him, but because I didn't. And yet, some silly, sad part of me remained hopeful. My entire upbringing rushed through my head. Every time I rooted for him from the sidelines. Every time I give up something I want so that he may have it instead. I always prioritized him just because it was expected of me. And suddenly, the second I needed to prioritize myself, the second I dared to think about my own well-being, I was nothing to him. I felt something inside of me crack. I had just informed them, I don't want to talk about it anymore, and was going to leave. It should have ended there. But my mother wasn't done. She grabbed my arm as I walked toward the door. She pressed so hard that it ached, her nails cutting into my skin and her face twisted in ways I'd never seen before. You are his sister, she snarled. You were born to help him. I froze. I'm not sure what was on my face. But the moment those words left her mouth, she relaxed, as if she had suddenly realized she had said too much. What? I asked. She backed back, wiping her face and averting my gaze. My father was suddenly too still. Even Arthur moved uncomfortably. Something in my stomach twisted. What do you mean I was born to help him? No one responded. The silence was audible. I looked at my father. Nothing. I stared at Arthur, but he wouldn't look at me. My mother then said, You're being dramatic, and turned away. But I was not foolish. I wasn't imagining anything. I knew there was something wrong. But I didn't realize how horrible it was. I can't recall leaving the house. I must have grabbed my bag, keys, or something. Because all of a sudden, I found myself in my automobile, driving without a destination. My heart was beating, and I felt like throwing up. So I pulled over at a petrol station, thinking solely of one thing. What exactly did she mean? Why did she say that, as if it were fact? And why did my father and Arthur respond as if it was something I should not have heard? I considered heading to my Aunt Courtney's place, barely holding myself together the entire way there. I must have looked like a wreck by the time I went through her front door, because she didn't even ask me any questions. She simply hugged me and urged me to stay as long as I needed. I did not sleep that night. By morning, I felt as if I were running on nothing but nerves. I sat at Aunt Courtney's kitchen table and told her everything. Every word, look, and second of that awful conversation. I expected her to say I was overthinking it, that my parents were simply emotional and said things they did not mean, that I was allowing my imagination to go wild. However, she didn't. Instead, she groaned and touched her temples, as if bracing herself before saying, Elysia, there's something I need to tell you. My gut tightened as I waited for her to continue. But she paused, as if she was considering whether or not to voice the words aloud. I knew it was horrible. She finally breathed and looked at me. Your parents didn't have you because they wanted another child. They had you because Arthur required a bone marrow donor. I stared at her, expecting her to say it was a horrible joke, that she was mistaken. She misunderstood something. However, she didn't. When he was 4, he became ill. They were desperate to save him but couldn't locate a match. So they made one. I heard and understood the words, but it seemed like my brain refused to process them. My parents had planned for me, not because they wanted me, but because they needed me. I wasn't born out of love, or even by mistake. I was born of need. My entire existence flashed before me, and everything instantly made sense. Every experience that made me feel like I was on the outside looking in. The way my accomplishments were never recognized. My presence was never a priority. My parents always made it clear, discreetly and in subtle ways, that Arthur came first. It wasn't because they happened to prefer him. It was because he was the reason I even existed. They never informed me? Courtney nodded, her face filled with something I couldn't quite identify. They were not going to. They raised you to believe that this was normal. They didn't believe you ever needed to know. I could not talk. I had spent my entire life trying to earn their love, believing that if I did enough, I would eventually matter to them in the same way that Arthur did. But I never had a chance. I was never meant to be more than a body that might be used if Arthur required it. I don't recall much of what Aunt Courtney said after that, except that she kept apologizing for not notifying me sooner, as if it were her fault. It was not. She had not been the one to lie to me my entire life. The following several days blurred together. I did not go home. I ignored all of my parents' calls, texts, and voicemail messages. I needed to figure out how to survive now that I knew the reality. My parents pretended everything was wonderful, as if we hadn't just had the worst argument of our lives. My mother's messages were curiously soft, almost too understanding, as if she were speaking to a toddler throwing a tantrum. She told me she understood I was overwhelmed, and that she felt I'd make the correct decision once I had time to ponder. My father's texts were brief but just as frightening. We're ready to talk again when you are. Family sticks together. You know what's expected. Arthur, of course, remained mute. He did not need to say anything. In his mind there was no decision to be made. A week passed, and when they realized I hadn't responded, their tone changed. My mother's messages turned, her disappointment evident in every word. My father quit pretending to be rational. You're making him suffer for nothing. This is the kind of thing you regret for the rest of your life. The kindness was gone. They were just waiting for me to crack. I blocked them. I'm not sure why I expected them to stop. Blocking them gave me a few days of silence, but it felt too quiet, like the calm before a storm. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting something. But I wasn't sure what. My aunt informed me that I was doing the right thing. I needed to focus on myself. But I could see how she looked at me, like if she was waiting for me to break. Maybe she expected me to cave, that I would break out of my obstinate streak and return to being the daughter my parents expected. And, truthfully, a small nasty part of me wondered whether she was correct. Because as much as I despised them, and had every reason to leave, it seemed strange not to care. It seemed as if I was breaking some invisible pact that had been imposed on me from infancy. Then, on a random Tuesday night, the storm struck. I was pulled over on my way to work. I was not speeding. My registration was up to date. I wasn't using my phone. There was no reason why I was pulled over. However, when the officer approached my window, he was not looking for a traffic infraction. Ma'am, we received anonymous information about illegal chemicals in your vehicle. I'm going to have to ask you to get out of the car. My entire body became frigid. What? I managed to say. Step out of the car, please. I realized I had nothing to hide. I'd never done anything unlawful in my life. But the way he said it, the way he stared at me, as if this was already a done deal, made my hands shake as I unbuckled my seatbelt and stepped out. They inspected my car, and behind the driver's seat, they discovered a small plastic bag containing drugs. I'd never seen that bag before. I wasn't sure where it had come from, but the moment I saw it, I knew. I knew exactly what had occurred. I hardly heard the officer mention that they needed to bring me in for questioning. I was too preoccupied trying to figure out how they had done it. It had to have been my parents. But I was unsure. They escorted me to the station, but I wasn't arrested, yet. I told them the same thing again and over. It's not mine. I've never seen it before. I'm sure someone set me up. After what seemed like an age, the officer sighed and remarked, "There are security cameras in that parking lot, correct?" I almost collapsed with relief. It took some time to study the tape, and with each passing second, I could feel my entire existence dangling on the edge of a cliff. What if the cameras didn't catch anything, and they couldn't prove I didn't do this? Would I get fired? Would I be charged? Would my parents come and bail me out only to say, "See? You need us right now. Do what we ask." But then one of the officers nodded and said, "Found something." I held my breath when they showed the footage. Arthur was standing out like a beacon. He wasn't being subtle about it. He crouched close to my car, took a couple quick glances around, then placed the bag under my seat with ease. I wasn't sure whether to scream or laugh. Officers exchanged looks. One of them nodded. "She's free to go," he said. "But we're going to have to bring him in." The following few hours were a haze. I sat at the station, numb. Arthur? He did not resist. He did not even attempt to explain. I could already see how this would go. He'd be sorry, explain it was a mistake, and blame his emotional state. And somehow my parents would ensure that he received the least amount of punishment possible. And what about my parents? They showed up within an hour, enraged. Not aimed at him. At me. My mother was in full hysterics, screaming into a tissue, her voice excessively loud, ensuring that everyone in the station heard her pain. "He's sick," she kept repeating. "He is unwell. He wasn't sure what he was doing. You need to understand." My father raged at me. "You forced him into this." And his eyes were filled with something I couldn't place. "You made him desperate." I stared at them. "Are you kidding me?" My voice came out as too low, controlled and dangerous. "You watched the footage. He wanted to have me arrested. Are you really blaming me for that? He wouldn't have done this if you had just done what you were supposed to do," my mother screamed, wiping away her fake tears. "You drove him into this, Elysia. You left him with no other options." At that point, seeing everybody go crazy about Arthur made something in me break. For years, I allowed them to make me feel inadequate. I felt selfish for desiring things for myself. They'd love me the same way they liked Arthur if I simply tried harder and improved a little. But there I was, standing in a police station, gazing at irrefutable evidence that my brother had just attempted to wreck my life. And they still selected him. There was no version of this in which they would choose me. And I was beyond pretending differently. I looked to my mother, barely recognizing my own voice as I spoke. "You've done this to me. You made him this way." She blinked at me, still playing the distraught mother role. "What are you talking about?" She sniffled and shook her head as if I were saying gibberish. I stepped forward. "Aunt Courtney told me," I explained. "She told me why you had me." My mother's face transformed quickly. The sobbing stopped, as if she had switched a switch. My father, who had been standing stiffly alongside her, now appeared to still. "I don't know what she told you, but she's always wanted to turn you against us." I gave a short, bitter laugh. "Are you going with that?" I asked. "Did she lie?" I took another step forward, forcing them to look at me. "Tell me the truth," I asked. "Did you have me, just so I could donate to Arthur?" My mother glanced at my father, but neither of them said anything. I felt a scorching, suffocating wrath swelling in my chest. "Say it." My mother looked at me for a long time before finally tilting her chin up. "We did what we had to do," she said, her tone stern. "You wouldn't be here if it weren't for Arthur." The words impacted harder than I expected. I already knew. Aunt Courtney had informed me. And deep down, it made sense. It explained everything. But hearing my mother say it so casually, as if it were just a fact, and I was foolish for even questioning it, still hurt. I'd spent my entire life trying to figure out why I always felt like I was present, but not actually a part of things. And now I had an answer. I looked at my father, half expecting him to lessen the shock. Perhaps say, "That's not how it was," or, "You're misunderstanding." But he did not. Without hesitation. "There is no guilt." Simply said, "We saved his life." That was the priority. Not me. Never me. Is that it? I asked myself, rather than them. Was that all I ever was to you? A backup plan? My mother seems unfazed. If anything, she appeared annoyed, as if she was weary of the chat and wanted to go on. "We raised you. We provided you with everything you needed. You had a home, food, and an education. And now that it's your turn to support this family, you're abandoning us?" That was really funny. "So now I'm part of the family?" I shook my head. "You did not want me. You just needed me." One of the officers cleared his throat to remind everyone where we were. "If you're done, we have charges to process." My mother went to them so quickly that she seemed to forget I was there. "You do not comprehend. My son, he was simply desperate. He was not thinking clearly." I looked at the officer. He did not even blink. "The security footage speaks for itself, ma'am." That's when my father changed tactics. Instead of defending Arthur, he moved toward the officer. "We can work it out. There's no reason for all this. We don't want to escalate the situation." He was negotiating, as if Arthur hadn't just attempted to frame me for a crime. Like this was just a minor issue that could be resolved with the right words. That was it. That was everything I needed to know. I turned to the officer, having already made my decision. "I'd like to press charges." My mother gasped in a breath as if I had just slapped her in the face. "Elysia, you wouldn't." I did not hesitate. "Yes, I would." My father remarked, "You're making a mistake." I addressed his gaze without flinching. "No," I replied. "The mistake was ever thinking you cared about me." And that was all. I was finished. It's been over a year since I walked out of that police station. And every day since then, I've learned what it's like to live without them. At first, it felt surreal. As if I was waiting for the inevitable, for them to appear and push me back into the part I was meant to play. But the longer I stayed away, the more I realized something terrifying. They would never change. They have always behaved like this. I was now seeing it for what it was. Arthur remained in prison. My parents did everything they could to get him out, but money can only go so far when you've already mortgaged your home to save your golden child. I assumed that once they realized the gravity of the situation, they'd back off and leave me alone. However, they didn't. Instead, they set up a GoFundMe. I wish I were joking. My mother cooked up an entire sob tale about how I abandoned them, and how Arthur was wrongly accused. She portrayed herself as a distraught mother of a sick child, fighting to keep the family together, while her selfish daughter ruined everything. Of course, folks ate it up. Distant relatives, family friends, and even complete strangers donated, commenting on how bad I was and how family should come first. I could have just let them dig their own graves and carried on with my life. But then one night, as I sat at my Aunt Courtney's kitchen table, she sighed and glanced at me, as if she had an idea she wasn't sure I'd like. "We should talk to your old doctor." I frowned. "What doctor?" "The one you were taken to as a child. The family doctor. He might have records as proof." I didn't require proof. I already knew what they'd done. But if there were documentation, anything incontrovertible, that revealed them, I might be able to stop them from doing this again. So we traced him down. Dr. Evans had retired years ago, but after we explained why we wanted to speak with him, he consented to meet. I was not expecting much. Perhaps a few verifying information. Perhaps simply validation that I wasn't crazy. But what he told me was worse than I could have ever imagined. I was not their second child. This was their fourth effort. They had 3 pregnancies and 3 abortions before I was born. When genetic tests revealed that the fetus was not a perfect match for Arthur, they terminated the pregnancy. They were not trying for a second child. They were attempting to build one. I felt nauseous. My entire life, I had believed, hoped, that somewhere deep below, there was love. That if I had only been more, done more, and tried harder, they might have loved me as much as they loved him. But I never had a chance. I wasn't born because they wanted me. I was born because I was the first successful person. Courtney grabbed my hand as I sat there unable to breathe while Dr. Evans handed me old records, medical docs that my parents undoubtedly assumed I'd never read. I took them and made my selection. I submitted everything to the authorities. Once the probe began, it quickly escalated. The fertility doctor with whom they worked lost his license immediately. It turned out that my parents weren't the only ones who had done this. There were more families. Other donor kids were created under the same conditions. The controversy erupted. And what about my parents? They lost everything. GoFundMe donations dried up. Family members who had helped them disappeared. Their names got dragged through the mud. Instead of admitting what they had done, they simply doubled down. My father termed it fake news. My mother claimed they were being persecuted for being wonderful parents. And Arthur? Arthur sat in prison, acting as if nothing was his fault. For the longest time, I assumed they'd vanish into the chaos they'd caused and leave me alone. But my parents had one final trick in them. One night, my cousin Jenna contacted me, her voice worried. "Elysia, I'm not sure whether you have heard, but Arthur attempted suicide." I felt a huge plummet in my chest. "What?" "I just saw your mother's article. She said he couldn't handle it anymore. That he is in critical condition. That if you still loved your family, you'd come visit him." For a second I wasn't sure what to say. I wanted to believe that it wasn't real. But what if it were? What if, despite everything, he had reached rock bottom? So I checked. I contacted the prison. I didn't ask for more information. I didn't want to be drawn into another manipulative game. I just inquired, "Is my brother alive?" When the cop answered the phone, he sounded bored. "Yeah, he's fine." I breathed slowly. "Is he in critical condition?" A pause. Then, "Not even close." That was it. That is all I needed to hear. They were lying again. They had staged his suicide attempt to coerce me into going back. I was not even surprised. They'd never cared about the truth. Only about control. I did not respond. I did not acknowledge them. Instead, I reported the Facebook post to the authorities. Within a week, my parents were left with nothing. Family members eventually cut them off. Their remaining friends left them. My mother removed her social media accounts. My father quit attempting to fight. It has been more than a year, and my life has changed dramatically. I went to a new city and took a new job. And for the first time, I feel like I belong anywhere. And the best part? I am engaged. Griffith knows everything. Every dark, twisted detail of what my family has put me through. Instead of treating me like a broken, tragic story, he treats me like a human being. As if I matter. And what's the biggest change? I am pregnant. Initially I was afraid. After everything I had gone through, I was afraid I wouldn't know how to be a good father. That I will somehow make the same mistakes as my parents. But then, Griffith said something that altered everything. "You know exactly what not to do." And he's correct. This baby will never doubt if they are wanted. They will never feel the need to earn my love. They will never be treated as a replacement part for someone else. They will be loved wholeheartedly, unreservedly. I might not have been born into a legitimate family. However, I am constructing one. And for the first time in my life, I'm totally liberated.